You are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke McKenna, but today's case is the Halloween killer case solved. Lisa French's injustice. Now, there was a little girl who deserved her innocence, and an entire town that changed everything about the way they lived, and a whole community that continues to fight, all because of one monster and what he did on Halloween night. By the way, this is ODDtober for any of you who don't know. I'm posting the strangest content this month on this channel, all having to do with true crime. So make sure you are subscribed, and if you want to make a girl happy, all you have to do is leave a nice comment below or give this a thumbs up. Now let's get back to the story. So it was 1973 in Wisconsin, and the French family lived in Fond du Lac. Now, they had a 9-year-old daughter named Lisa Ann. She was a 4th grader who attended the Chegwig Elementary School. She was an adorable little thing with dark brown eyes and a shorter haircut and teeth that were actually missing because her baby ones had fallen out, and she was waiting for them to grow back in. Now, she was innocent and loving. She had trusting eyes and a winning smile, and she actually wanted to be a butterfly for that Halloween. Unfortunately, it was too cold for that, so her mother suggested that she be a hobo. That way she could wear multiple layers. So on October 31st of 1973, she dressed up in a masking tape covered jeans as well as a huge floppy felt hat and a green parka. And her mother also painted freckles on her because she was a cosmetologist and loved to do things like that for her daughter. Now, Lisa had planned to go to a place called Pumpkin Place with her best friend Anne at this time, and they were going to go there and meet so they could trick-or-treat together. It was only a block away from her home on East Bank Street, and it was set up to basically be a very safe place for children to be able to go and trick-or-treat. And the only reason they really worried about the safety was because they'd heard rumors about the poisoning the candy, and the parents in the area were very tight-knit and put this on to keep everyone safe. Either Anne or Lisa, one or the other. I've seen many different sources say different things. One of them were in trouble that night, and they had gotten in trouble and were not allowed to trick-or-treat together. At 6 p.m., Lisa headed out of her home, which was super common in the 70s. No one really feared for their safety of going out alone. And so she left her home at 192 Amory Street. After finishing dinner, she kissed her parents goodbye and she walked out the front door. Now, Lisa was to be home by 7, and due to the fact that there's conflicting sources, I'm not sure if she was just going down her block to, get candy from them before going to the pumpkin place, or if she was not allowed to go and she was the one who was in trouble. But either way, she was just going on her block. Due to the fact that she left at 6 and was to be back at 7, it almost makes me believe that she was the one that was in trouble and had to be back just an hour later. But she would never return at that time. In fact, it was 3 hours after that, and by 10 p.m., her mom knew that she wouldn't have just skipped curfew, and she immediately contacted the police, who contacted everyone in the community. Like I said, the parents in this community were super close. They were called block parents, and they contacted every single parent in the area to turn on their lights and put up signs, which I'm assuming said, something about her going home, or someone worried about her safety, or that Lisa could come into their home if she needed help. And these were put up in every single window in the area. Now, the police, of course, searched this area all through the night, and by the next morning they had 5,000 volunteers wanting to help out. This included the National Guard that had helicopters and planes going overhead. They had volunteers on horses going into the fields. They had volunteers in Land Rovers that were going into the marshes, and the police were also looking into the lakes and the rivers in the area and dragging them. Everyone in this community was so helpful. Even the gas stations, they had said, if anyone is using their car to help search for Lisa, we will give you 25 gallons of gas for free. So there were people literally everywhere. Even if they weren't the best people, they probably heard that deal and were like, well, I might as well go help look. So literally everyone who could be out was, and if people didn't want to go out into the fields to look, they were printing off Lisa's school picture along with a description of what Halloween costume she was wearing, and they were posting these posters everywhere and handing them out to people. Unfortunately, no matter how hard they searched, it was already too late for little Lisa Ann. 3 days later, a farmer Braun would be going down McCabe Road in Taycheetah on his tractor when he would see garbage bags. They looked as though they had just been tossed in the brush while somebody sped down the road. Now, he feared what was inside because he knew of this little girl who had gone missing, and unfortunately, his nightmare came true. He would call the police immediately. However, the entire community got news of this and were there before police could even get there. There were people crying and mourning, throwing themselves on the ground in just a fit of panic. It was literally a horrific sight for everyone, and nobody could contain their emotions in that moment. There was even a pastor who climbed this barbed wire fence to get to Lisa's body, and he cut up his hands while doing so, but he didn't care. He went over to her and he was basically praying with her, saying, "Our Father, Hail Mary," and was sobbing just like everybody else. It was a community in shock. They felt just as though Lisa was their daughter, a part of their family. The family had so much support, but what they really wanted was answers. On November 6th, it was Lisa's funeral. She was dressed in a white and purple dress that she had worn on picture day of that year. And her mother did her hair as she had always done. Everyone in the community came to pay their respects, and literally it was so crowded in there that there was no standing room. There was nowhere to go because there were so many people crying and just wanting to give the family so much support and also grieving themselves. When her autopsy had been done, it concluded that her cause of death was from shock, which is not very common at all. In fact, to think about what she had to go through to get to that point of dying of shock was horrific to even think about. And they didn't even have the answers yet. By then, investigators had spoke to everyone in the area, going house to house, saying who had seen Lisa, who had had her trick-or-treat at their door, and 2 people actually did say that she was at their door. One being a local teacher named Karen, who said that she had came and trick-or-treated, and the other being a house across the street which had one of Lisa's classmates inside, and she had trick-or-treated there as well. Now, while talking to everyone, there was a man who police believed could be involved. They were very suspicious of him. However, they had yet to have any evidence to prove anything against him. But they weren't giving up on him yet. For months, a police captain and a special agent would go and just ask him questions at his home and ask him where he was that Halloween, what he had been doing, and his story would often change. By mid-1974, they brought him in, or asked if they could, for a lie detector test. At first, he actually refused this, and finally he said that he would. However, his results would come back inconclusive. Now, we know that sometimes lie detector tests actually oftentimes aren't accurate, and so that didn't really mean much. However, this was just adding to the fire that they already had, that they believed that he had something to do with Lisa's disappearance and murder. And they began to interrogate him further. Then on August 8th of 1974, 25-year-old Gerald Turner confessed. This was 9 months after Lisa had been found. He had said that Lisa stopped by his house that night to trick-or-treat. His door was open and she kind of popped her head in to say trick-or-treat, to which he invited her into his home, into his bedroom, and shut the door behind her. He then began to sexually assault her, and he noticed that she was not breathing and began to try to revive her. However, his girlfriend came home at this time and he had to hide her instead. He said he was sexually motivated to do what he did to Lisa, but he didn't mean to kill her. And when his girlfriend finally left, he put her in garbage bags and went and dumped her. And he even drew a diagram of where he dumped her body, and it was in the exact location where her body had been found. Now, some of these things that Gerald was saying could have just been things he heard from the press. However, investigators re-examined the bags, and allegedly they found Gerald's hair not only in the bag but on Lisa, and they matched it to him. It was said that Lisa had even known Gerald prior to this because he had lived closer to her at one point, and of course Gerald had a baby with his girlfriend Arlene, and Lisa would often take this baby out on walks and push it in the stroller. So that would be why she would be so comfortable with going inside his home, because she wasn't expecting a monster. Gerald's girlfriend Arlene was then asked about her whereabouts that night, and she said she had gone to the pumpkin place with her baby that evening and got home around 7:15, to which Gerald was sitting on the couch in his robe saying that he didn't feel good, and that because they had plans to go see Arlene's mother after that he couldn't go because he didn't feel good. Arlene left for a while, realized her mother wasn't home yet, went back to their apartment, or to their home, and that is when Gerald kept going back and forth to his bedroom, back into the living room to his bedroom, saying that he needed to rest, that she needed to leave him alone. But when the trial began, Gerald said that that confession was not his own, and that the police basically harassed him to the point of him signing anything they would have said to get them to stop. Now, he claimed he didn't kill Lisa at all. He had no idea what happened to her. However, a psychologist testified that Gerald had a cold disregard for people, mainly females, and did not have a conscience to control his impulses for pleasure and to conform to society's laws. He also showed zero remorse during this entire trial. The jury found Gerald guilty of second-degree murder, enticing a child for immoral purposes, and acts of sexual perversion, and sentenced him to 38 years, which is not long enough in my eyes, especially when he wouldn't be serving the full sentence. The whole community had already changed their ways of living and had been forever changed by Lisa's murder, and they made Halloween a daylight event where nobody was allowed to go out after dark, that it was literally just during the daylight that anyone was allowed to trick-or-treat. But now they would have to worry about a monster being back on the streets, because 17 years later in 1992, Gerald would be released for good behavior. And he had even written a letter to Lisa in prison saying, "I doubt that I could ever fully realize the terror you experienced at my hands. I can still see you standing in the doorway with that felt hat beaming at having recognized me. Then I see the delight in your eyes turn to fear as I close the door behind you. The rest of my life I will have to live with what I did to you." According to the A Price to Pay blog, at this time when he was in prison, Gerald was actually not ever one to speak to anyone, because he knew that if he spoke to anyone without being spoken to, he would most likely be beaten up. Because someone who assaults a child is in basically the bottom tier of the inmates, and they don't respect them at all. So he didn't really speak to anyone, and that could have contributed to his good behavior. But either way, he was then in a halfway house, and the next year he was ordered back to prison because the public was protesting so hard about it that a civil lawsuit was actually filed to hold him in jail again for a year. Unfortunately, again in 1994, they would try to release him once again. However, there had been a new law created for Gerald himself. It was actually a law because of him. It was called Turner's Law, and it allowed violent sex offenders to be committed to a secure treatment center if people considered them still a threat to society, so they weren't just out on their own while people decided to make a decision on whether they were supposed to be out on their own or not. So he was immediately sent to a secure mental institute under his own law. However, it would be another fight to keep him locked up, because 4 years later there would be a trial to see if he was still a sexual predator. The jury said that they simply couldn't see that he still fit that description, even though he'd been found guilty of sexually assaulting and murdering a 9-year-old. As a free man, it only took him a year to be up to the criminal activity once again. He began waving a knife and threatening a coworker where he worked at the group home as a cook. Unfortunately, they did nothing about this. They said it was not enough to get him back in jail. However, in 2003, what he would be found doing would get him back in jail. That was because he was still on parole, and they went to do a routine checkup at this group home and found that not only did he have graphic images and videos and magazines, which violated that parole, but he was also watching movies of serial killers, meaning that it could escalate into something even darker than what he had already done. Finally, he was given those 15 years. However, 15 years goes pretty fast, especially for this family who has continued to have to fight and not been able to breathe. And that would mean that he would have been released in 2018. However, the Wisconsin Department of Justice, along with Lisa's mother, Anne, fought hard, and they created a petition to get him committed to this mental institute. At this point, the decision was still up in the air, and while they waited for it to be reached, he was actually put into the Sand Ridge Secure Treatment Center. It was taking so long because this case that was happening in Fond du Lac was trying to be transferred to Dane County in 2018 so that there would be a more fair trial, and because Dane County was where he had broken the law the last time. This year there was actually an update that the Wisconsin Appeals Court said that he would actually be having the trial in a Fond du Lac courtroom instead. However, this is the last update we have ever heard about this case. Gerald is still in a secure center where he cannot harm anyone else, or so we hope, but let's just hope it stays that way forever. Lisa's friend Anne, who was supposed to go with her that day, says that they were inseparable back then, that she loved being Lisa's friend. She was funny, she was bubbly, she was outgoing, and she feels an incredible amount of guilt for not being there for her friend when she should have. And she also says about Gerald, that son of a should burn in hell. A day doesn't go by that I am not thinking of my lost friend, missing her even after all this time. Now, the French family, Lisa's family, has struggled so much with this, especially having to fight to keep this monster locked up. During this time that this all happened, Lisa's mother was actually pregnant with her next child that was another little girl. Lisa's younger sister, who is now grown up, says, I think I was 35 years old before I finally understood what my mother went through and was able to forgive her. Halloween was horrible, and there was always so much guilt and pain and anger over what happened. Now, a strange little tidbit that I actually found on this case was after Lisa's funeral, her mother went into her bedroom and was just kind of looking around and found a stack of papers on her bed that said a gift from God. And they were all just uplifting messages written in Lisa's handwriting. This year would be the 46th anniversary of Lisa's murder, and I just wanted to share this story for her and for her family so that they know that we see the injustice that they have gone through, that we will fight with them, and that they shouldn't have to constantly fear the release of this monster, because it makes no sense to me why anybody would ever let somebody like that out. And I hope that we get some updates soon, but for right now it does give a little peace of mind to know that he is still locked away. But if it wasn't for Lisa's mother pushing, that probably wouldn't have happened. And I'm sure that that happens a lot, where they're just released while the court system figures out what they're going to do. I know that this one was a little bit more of a downer, and I found it intriguing because it was the Halloween killer, but more importantly, I found it important to tell Lisa's story, because it seems like there was an incredible amount of injustice done. Don't ever forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay? Bye.